Thanks for joining our webinar today, Prescriptions for Enterprise Mobile 2016, brought to you by Propelics. We have 6 strategists here ready to give their prescriptions for 2016, not their predictions. Anybody can give predictions. We are giving prescriptions. If you have any questions, be sure to enter them into the go-to question panel, and we will address your questions during the webinar at the conclusion of each strategist spiel, and we're not going to save them for the end. So lastly, this session is being recorded, and the slides will be available later today on our website. So now we're going to kick it off. Partner Erik Karlsson, my personal boss, is going to start it off with some background on Propelics.
Thanks, Steve. I would love to. Welcome everyone to the webcast. Like Steve said, my name is Erik Karlsson. Great session today and great turnout for our typical end of the year webinar around prescriptions for enterprise mobility. I just want to spend 2 minutes and just giving you a little bit of background in terms of who we are, if this is your first webinar with us. Propelics creates mobile strategies and world-class applications for the enterprise. 100% of our focus is on mobile for the enterprise, specifically the higher value and creating higher value use cases and roadmaps and IT strategies for mobile applications and solutions for primarily employees and partners. And sometimes we extend those out to the customer base as well. We have a 20-year track record of providing enterprise-level strategy and delivery to Fortune 500 companies, and we've built strategies around technology use, but even more when it comes to leveraging disruptive technologies, very much like we have on some of the topics and some of the prescriptions for today. And for the last 8 years or so, maybe a little bit longer, we've been working exclusively in mobile, first on single-use embedded devices and kind of in the early days around Windows Mobile and things like that, and really more specifically around riding the wave of consumer mobile devices as they enter the enterprise. And we've always been trying to drive valuable use cases to the employees and customers and partners of our clients. We're based in San Jose. We have consultants across North America and a development center in Guadalajara, Mexico. We focus on clients in North America, but many of our engagements include a global reach. And you'll see a couple of those here in a second. Here's a small list of our clients here. As you can see, we work across a whole lot of different industries, including retail and pharmaceutical, financial services, manufacturing, a lot of services, really anywhere we have a large mobile workforce who can benefit from mobile roadmaps and building mobile applications that can elevate and simplify business processes with mobile. And then just a little bit in terms of what we do. We really have 4 categories of services. Upper left here, you'll see some areas around our mobile strategy work. These are fast-paced workshop as quickly as a single week, usually between a week and 4 weeks. We've built our services and a lot of these kickstarts around specific challenges we see repeatedly in discussions with our clients. And so you see some of those here, such as enterprise mobile roadmap creation, around building an app scope and doing a quick prototype related to a good mobile app idea. We do a lot of work in mobile UI UX design with our clients, who is typically not a strong point of work that they do. A lot of IT strategy for mobile engagements, and then some other types of things as organizations move on around mobile center of excellence, testing strategy, emerging technologies, and things like that. From an app development and support perspective, we deliver all of our in-house implementation services and managed solutions for our strategy clients. We focus heavily on great user experience and application simplicity upfront, and we try to build quality, reusable, and very portable code as middle-tier services connecting to our clients' enterprise backends. And down on the bottom part, the third area is our Mobile Research Council. You can visit at www.mobileresearchcouncil.com. We started the MRC to fill a few gaps that we saw. First, our clients are missing access to mobile-first analyst viewpoints from a group that truly understands enterprise mobility. And so we joined with Maribel Lopez from Lopez Research to build an interactive discussion forum for our clients to share mobility-related news and share implementation stories and collaborate on use cases and technology discussions. It's a vendor-free zone, and check us out at mobileresearchcouncil.com. And lastly, our products. As we've helped our organizations to deliver enterprise mobile roadmaps and solutions, we started to see some very repeatable solutions on those roadmaps. And so instead of our clients spending time on those, we wanted them to go spend time on more valuable use cases. And some of these are really more plumbing based. So we have SureAudit. It's extremely powerful enterprise auditing and surveying platform for mobile with an analytics backend and integration to enterprise systems. And Exact Meeting, which is enterprise built conference room and amenity finding and booking application for large organizations that have multiple different locations and a lot of complexity in terms of finding meeting space. And Lead to Capture, which is the best way to capture trade show leads for follow-up and closeout. So Stephen, now you wanted to maybe kick us off a little bit?
Sure. So first up, we have strategist Glenn Gruber, and Glenn is going to be discussing whether or not 2016 represents the year of mobile in the enterprise.
Okay, great. All right, Zach, you can move to the next. There we go. So, all right. So the headline. By the way, welcome everyone. This is actually going to work out a lot better than this last couple of minutes. The headline is a little facetious, with the 2013, 14, 15, 16. But, analysts and pundits have been saying that this is the year of mobile every year for the last couple of years, just always kind of changing the top of their slide. But I really do think, and we do as a group, that we're really on the cusp of doing really good things as an industry. Now, there are many examples of enterprises, some of which we work with, that have delivered dozens, more than 100 apps, to employees to really enhance productivity, to reimagine and transform business processes. But these are the exceptions, really, to the rule that are held out as the shining examples for everyone to follow. But the problem is that right now they're really still too few and far between. But I think really that we're very close, and I'll talk about that in a moment. I also, I just talked about the number of apps that are deployed by some of these companies, but it's easy to really look at the number of apps as a metric as to how well we're doing. But I think we also need to understand that we shouldn't be confusing volume with value. You can deploy a lot of apps with minimal value, and it has, individually, it has no real impact on the company, versus taking a couple of really core key business processes and really being able to make a real impact when you look at the overall business drivers and objectives for the company. Now, on the other hand, we say that the number of apps isn't the right metric. According to a recent Good Technology Mobility Index, the number of apps offered by employees within the enterprise is really low. About 8 of every 9 enterprises are providing less than 5 apps outside of just basic email contacts and calendar. Now, we can certainly do a lot better than that. I also want to, also as we look at what's happened over these past couple of years, the last, 3 or 4 years has a lot of focus on the IT infrastructure deployment, not so much on the app strategy. So we've got our MDM solutions. Maybe some of us have gotten MAM. We've made some improvements to the security and to the network infrastructure. So we're well positioned. We have a strong foundation, but still we've had little real impact because we don't really have that app strategy part tied together with the technology strategy. So as we move into 2016, which I think we're ready. We've got a lot of stuff behind us. Where should we put our focus? How can we start to really be successful as an enterprise with mobile? So, number one, let's move away from content access and move towards process improvement. A lot of companies have started with kind of the Web 1.0 style of mobile. How can we get content on SharePoint and internal portals out to our employees? That's good, but again, not impactful. The real power of mobile is not in that content access, but in really completing and enhancing business process, getting things done. So let's put that focus there, and going through a bunch of, there are different techniques like ideation or daily life to try and uncover what are those opportunities for us. So let's go do that. And on a related note, we should focus on experimentation and learning. Do a lot of prototypes, try new ideas, see what works. You can get a lot of information from prototypes and proof of concept with relatively little effort and expense, which is a lot better than saying that I've got a great idea, putting hundred or hundreds of thousands of dollars into the development, only to find out that it didn't really do what we thought it would when we had it up on the whiteboard. So these prototypes and POCs, beyond trying to help refine what that UX should be like, what the functionality that we require to get things done, it's really important to help us validate those ideas before putting all those resources into it. Another area where I think we should be putting some focus is the instrumentation and ownership of analytics within the apps that we've deployed. Amazingly enough, according to an Aperion study, half of companies don't have any earthly idea if, how many, or who is using their apps, and whether or not they're using in the ways that we expected them to. So how can we approve it if we're not really measuring what we've done and what's happening? So, and even in the cases where we do have apps that have been instrumented, there's nobody who's responsible for monitoring those results and then taking corrective action, whether improving features, responding to bugs or performance issues. So what's the point? So we really need to get on top of this. Let's instrument, let's also have some ownership over those analytics. And then lastly, when we think about are we being successful, let's look at this from an ROI perspective. Especially if we've implemented these analytics, we can start tracking real business impact with real business metrics. Treat mobile the same way that you would any other product in your business. If we're doing those analytics, we can tell, are we improving cycle times? Are we improving conversions of certain activities? Do we have better productivity out of our people? It's very easy to track those metrics, and especially if you've kind of highlighted what are the metrics and business drivers that are important to us as an organization, then we can start to make sure that the ROI metrics that we're using is aligned to those and check that. So that's really what I've got. It sounds pretty straightforward, but it's really some good blocking and tackling. So that's back to you, Steve, or any questions that we may have.
Yeah, the folks on this call, I'm sure, have talked about ROI and things like related to mobile applications, right? That idea is not new. So what do you think is really different now in 2016, or what types of ROI are the most valuable and useful to be able to calculate? And it's usually a topic that gets glossed over, right? We know that it's large, so therefore we're going to go do it. Like, what are you trying to get to?
So I think a lot of where maybe we've gone, I don't want to say wrong, but maybe put the wrong emphasis on when we look at ROI and metrics is either we're saying, well, it's mobile, we've got to do it, and therefore let's not focus so much on the ROI piece of it yet because it's new. Or secondly, we're looking at things like engagement, the type of things that maybe we would consider more from a consumer-facing use of mobile. And engagement is important, but it's still not yet tied to outcomes. So I don't think that there's anything particularly new in this conversation. The type of metrics that you would look at is really going to be heavily based upon what is the app that you're building. If it's about can we reduce the cycle time of people who are selling equipment or cars, any kind of vendor financing. If we can make that process go from what might be, a couple of weeks to a couple of minutes, like that's a huge number, and really pretty easy to calculate. So, it really depends on what the objective is, and starts with understanding what are the outcomes and business drivers that we're trying to drive, and then tracking the results of that back.
All right, thanks so much, Glenn, for that great summary of we can take mobile a little more seriously in 2016 in the enterprise. I don't see any more questions from the group, so just move ahead. Next up, we have strategist Bhatia, who's going to talk about Windows 10 and Surface Pro in the enterprise. Take it away, Deep.
Thanks, Steve, and good afternoon, everybody. Like Glenn said, that every year is said to be the year of mobility, right? So what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is going to talk about what's happening in the enterprises with respect to Windows 10 launch. What have we seen after its launch? And then I'll briefly cover the prescription for 2016s, and then happy to answer your questions. So just before we start into what we have seen, let's take a step back and look at what happened in 2015. As we enter in the 2015, Apple continued to rule the mobile enterprise space. According to Good Technologies, entering into 2015 in first quarter, iOS has about 72% of the enterprise market share. They just lost 1% of over the Q4 2014, and that's for the global device activations. Android has about 26%, and Windows remain at 1 to 2% for enterprises. It launched on July 29th with much fanfare. As we know, it's generated a lot of discussions on tech forums, a lot of reviews, webinar, blogs, which we all have seen, claim to be much better than 8.1. But as the year progressed, the opinion remained fragmented. Also, Windows as a service has been on the cards for some time. The idea is that the window will transition away from being a product that sees periodic major releases to a product that's continually being updated and tweaked in the background. Now, it's claimed to have the much higher adoption rate as compared to the other versions of Windows, but that's predominantly for the operating systems on the laptops and the desktops, not necessarily that for the tablet devices. And also keep in mind that the free upgrade is driving the adoption rate. Now also on the other hand, we know that iOS has the 5-year head start, and there's a lot of existing investments in infrastructure, processes, as well as apps, which has already been made by the enterprises. If you look into other aspect of it, IT likes Windows 10 just because of its seamless integration with Windows infrastructure ecosystem, and also they can have the better control. So to summarize, what happened in 2015 is that Windows 10 is starting the devices again and bringing more disruption. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about what we have seen. What we have seen is that more and more enterprises are putting Windows 10 in their mobile strategies in 2016. If nothing else, they want to at least evaluate it, and obviously this will cause the device distraction that have a potential of moving focus away from the core business process optimization, which Glenn just talked about, for mobility to the device-centric thinking. I will talk more about that in next few minutes in our prescription for 2016. But we are seeing a lot of questions about the Windows 10 devices. In addition, the single device strategy is back into the table for enterprises. A lot of interest, a lot of questions comes in the various industry event. Now, also as the Windows 10 is going to become more stabilized in 2016, adoption will definitely increase, specifically for the small and mid-sized enterprises for desktop version. Adoption in the tablet world will still be slow. The enterprise is going to have on their IT strategy and roadmap, but there's a lot of factors need to be considered before Windows 10 can become an effective enterprise tool. Can you go to the next slide, please? Now let's come back to the 2016 prescription. So although there's many areas we can talk about in 2016 with regard to the OS and devices, there are three major areas I want to focus on in this webinar right now. First thing is what we'll advise is that avoid the device distraction. So remember, mobile is not just about device. With Win 10 devices such as Surface Pro as a noticeable tablet player, it's likely that many enterprises will try to jump into this and get distracted, and may lose focus on the enterprise mobile strategy. Many industry research shows right now that over the next 3 years, the growth rate of the Windows tablet in enterprise will far exceed as compared to Android and Apple. Now, it's not necessarily number of devices when they talk about the growth rate. And since in the current industrial ecosystem, the number of devices of the Windows are tablets are far less, so the growth rate will increase. There's no doubt about that. Again, we need to remember that mobile is not about the device only. It's about taking advantage of the mobile device's capabilities to simplify business processes. So organizations should avoid the distraction of on focusing too much on the device or OS for making the mobility decision. We need to take a look into the business driver, use cases, existing investment, and far more aspects to have the effective and adoptable mobile strategy. So that's about the device distraction. Now the single device strategy is back on the table. With iPad, many enterprises consider the idea of single devices for at least for their field-based employees. Great concept, but didn't have much success rate because of, a lot of reasons, like lack of IT control, limited office productivity capabilities like Excel, PowerPoints, compliance concerns, among many others. And what's going to happen is that with Windows Tablet, enterprise and especially IT will relook into their strategy and roadmap for 2016 and may want to go to the single device again. Now, as the Windows 10 mature, get better support of MDM and MADM platforms, it'll gonna be more, feasible. Seems like more feasible to do that. And there's no doubt some of those obstacles in moving to single device are no longer there with Win 10 tablet as compared to iPad, but overall road to reach there can still be rocky. Now, come to final prescription is that, as we know, the iPad growth was mostly organic and driven by business more than IT in most organizations. In fact, IT oversights were somewhat neglected by the business to gain competitive advantages. IT lagged behind since their roadmap and strategy is limited to infrastructure, device management, app distribution. So as I said earlier, in most cases, IT is more comfortable with the Windows ecosystem. They are likely to promote Windows 10 and they can build a good business case with potentially huge saving. So what we prescribe is that to streamline your governance process for mobility, more than ever, now it calls for need of a mobility COE. And the reason for that is that careful consideration should be given to look into all aspects of mobility strategy, like device, existing application, use cases, apps, distribution, security, testing, and also often neglected soft aspects such as the change management and the governance model. So that's kind of overall thing for 2016, that avoid device distraction and look into your overall strategy in a more holistic way. Thanks, Steve. That's all I have got. Any questions?
Erik, do you see any questions logged?
Yeah, I have one. Actually, Arun from the in the question panel is going to ask pretty much the same thing I have. His comment was, for consumers and enterprises, mobile is about apps. So without mobile apps, how will Windows succeed? And I think you're getting to some of this, Steve, but we've been talking about this a little bit as well. So that whole thing around the chicken and the egg related to platforms and platforms such as public platforms like the App Store or Google Play or things like that, or the Windows Store versus users. And does that model have to work for the enterprise? And I'm not convinced it does. People bringing phones and things like that, I think is one thing, and having Windows 10 really play a role on the phone side or on the smartphone side, I think is something that's a decision that's still out, right? If that's going to be something that even happens in any sort of real manner. But from a tablet perspective, we see organizations that have strong iPad or iOS kind of strategies that are smartphone and tablet based, and those tablets play a role in that, but they might not be a complete replacement, like you talked about, a single device strategy. But I do see, we also see a lot of IT enterprises that are on the sidelines related to iOS development, especially on the tablet side, and trying to build obviously more applications that might run on a Windows 10 type of tablet, and saying, well, we can bring everything across in this situation and use a single device type of strategy. So I don't know if the store, like, do we have any clients where the public store plays a role in a platform decision for tablets? And I'm not sure if we do right now.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, like we said, it's a long way to go right now. at this point of time, yes, the IT parts of driving the Windows 10 is mostly device centric and not the app centric, and that's where uh, they are focusing on. So yeah, there's a long way to go. I'm not convinced at this point of time that 2016 will be the year where there's going to be a lot of Windows 10 growth. But like I said, definitely garnering a lot of interest.
Yeah. Hey, this is Glenn. I just want to add in one thing about that. It's actually, on this app issue and maybe this false choice of whether or not we want a one device strategy. I think that's still an open question. But the one concern that I have in terms of IT wanting to try and drive this because it's a device that they're comfortable with and can control better is I do think that where people have made some good strides with mobile overall and even on the tablet side is just by changing the whole approach to UX and the way that we do things. My concern is that IT is also going to say, well, I don't even have to develop any tablet or touch-oriented apps because you can run all the apps and use the same spreadsheets and this and that as you can today. So we're going to stagnate on our kind of glide path of improving employee experience and enhancing productivity.
It's a huge risk. I agree. Yep.
Yeah, and that take away the mobile first thought process. I mean, we are not replacing the mobility is never bolt on. I mean, a lot of enterprise try to do is a bolt on. So they have one process, they want to move that to mobile. That's not really the real strength or the core of mobility. It's about the business process. What are the use cases which can be worked best for mobile? There may be certain use cases which are not meant for mobile. So I think organizations need to look this holistically and develop a kind of COE or strategy or look into some kind of ideation to really see what they want to move on before jumping into the device-centric thought process.
Yeah, and I think, I agree. And at the end of the day, if there's a decision in this area based on tablet use, and that decision is based on ease of management or the lack of building a strategy around looking at those processes that those end users are using, and they're just basically trying to get down to a single device strategy where I don't want to carry an iPad and a laptop or have an iPad and a home device or something like that, which is pretty common that we see today. If that's the goal, that's the end goal, then I think that we've talked about a little bit, but that is going to be at the expense of the app development and from the business analyst perspective to say, are we re-looking at these processes in a mobile context, or is it, like you said, another device? And I think that's the big risk here is if that is available, will these groups really streamline, or will they really look at this business process in a more detailed way, or will it be just a matter of, hey, we're on one device and we'll get around to making these more touch friendly, or we'll do whatever, but in the meantime, here's your Excel spreadsheets, here's PowerPoint, and here's these backend systems you can get in SAP and other types of things from this single device at the expense of the user experience.
And not to forget, when the CIO looking to that, they are obviously looking at the huge cost saving for moving to single devices, just because of support part of it. So yeah, it's a huge risk and something which we need to look very carefully before making any decision or enforcing the decision from IT to the business.
Okay, so I know we have, just from a time perspective, there was a great question about Roy about multiple devices, and maybe Nitin is somebody you can, it's kind of in line with what you're going to talk about. But Roy asks, when we talk about mobile, why is it that we're only talking mobile? Should the strategy be different when it comes to things like Google TV or Apple TV, et cetera? And will the strategy be different for omni-channel approach? So I think we're going to talk about some of those points coming up. I just didn't want to lose it, and maybe Nitin, you could tie that in a little bit with some of the stuff that you're going to talk about too.
Yeah, sure thing. Right, so my topic that I'm going to give a prescription on is the Internet of Things, which I'm sure most of you are tired of hearing because it's been used as a buzzword for quite a bit now. So conceptually speaking, the Internet of Things has existed since the 70s, and back then it was known as embedded Internet. It was primarily used in the manufacturing industry, oil and gas, utility companies, large companies that essentially wanted to monitor and control their machineries remotely. So that technology back then had several limitations. One of them was, there was a one-to-one endpoint communication. There was a lot of proprietary software that was used. and it was essentially extremely difficult for organizations to be able to do anything with that. So since then, the technology has continued to evolve, and now, it as it has evolved, it's gone through several different names, and one of the most recent names that has stuck with was something that was kind of coined in 1999 by Kevin Aston from P&G, and it's called the Internet of Things. So the Internet of Things kind of started appearing on Gartner's hype curve, which you see here on the slide, since 2011. And this hype curve here is from 2015 of this year, and it's essentially kind of gone from an innovation trigger to the peak of inflated expectations. And to further cause confusion, industry analysts have got a variety of speculations in terms of where the market is going to be in the next 5 years. We've got all kinds of numbers, from the number of devices that are going to be online versus the projected revenue that IoT could generate. Some of the numbers from Gartner are like, by the end of 2020, we're going to have 26 billion devices worldwide. McKinsey says the global market value for IoT is going to be $620 billion by 2025. Cisco thinks that the market is going to be about $14 trillion by the end of 2020. So I will not bore you with the numbers, as I can already tell. Some people are already glazing their eyes. But aside from all the numbers, I think one thing kind of stands out across all these predictions or speculations is the enterprise is going to lead the charter when it comes to growth in IoT over the next 5 years. So per one of the Gartner estimates, out of the 23 billion IoT devices that will be connected by 2019 across all sectors, the enterprise market is going to account for 40% of the total devices. So that's about 9.1 billion devices total, and that's across all three sectors, which is government, home, and enterprise. So before we jump into 2016, let's take a look into where we are right now. Next slide, please. So over the last few years, the consumer use for IoT has just had phenomenal growth. I'm sure we've seen all around us, right? The market is flooded with all kinds of form factors that allow the consumer to do everything from counting steps to counting calories, to home energy management, to car monitoring and engine diagnostic, and much more. So
tracking their baby's diaper for wetness.
Absolutely,
That's
yeah, tracking that. I got that one. But that being said, the use cases that we've seen so far, have been very pointed and low on the maturity curve, as we can tell from a lot of these, and growing, and since they're based on incremental innovation and technology that are essentially leveraged to accomplish these use cases. So there's also been several concerns, and one of the one that's as always tops the list is encryption or security and privacy. So consumers, in the media today, you hear a lot of just chatter about so-and-so has been hacked. Target, Macy's, Nordstrom's, you name it, the retailer has probably had some kind of a cyber attack. And as consumers are adopting more and more devices that gather data, they're more and more concerned about how their information is being stored, and if they're at risk of being if that information is at risk of being stolen just because the vendor doesn't have good practices or doesn't understand how to capture data. Next slide, please. So on the enterprise side of the house, the enterprise has definitely taken a more cautious approach, as always. So apart from a few select sectors and niche use cases in the manufacturing and logistics area, the rest of the sectors have been taking kind of a wait-and-see approach, and of course, understandably so. There are lots of barriers that don't make IoT attractive. First and foremost is security. Now, if companies are fearful of security now, just imagine when they embed all these sensors to all essentially go all the way to the edge, as they say. There's a much larger spread of endpoints that is susceptible to attacks. So organizations have to be extremely careful and extremely cautious when they open up kind of a can of worms on this. Also, the IoT space is extremely fragmented. Most solutions are typically tailored for very niche use cases, and essentially the space lacks an end-to-end platform that could be tailored to fit customers' needs, and which also integrates with existing enterprise solutions, of course, which is how they would derive value from it. So this drastically kind of inhibits how an organization can scale an IoT solution. So that's also one of the barriers. And probably one of the most important barriers, according at least by me, is just a lack of concrete use cases. I think apart from the niche use cases, like I want to monitor my offshore oil rigs, or I want to monitor how hot my machines get. I think there's organizations haven't gotten past the theoretical or conceptual use for IoT.
Yeah, I feel like IoT is going to be it has much more use case in the B2C arena where a connection to the internet represents another marketing opportunity for that company, or another opportunity for the customer to order more product. You know what I mean? And where you don't have to worry about these security risks.
Yeah, there's a very clear path from the technology to the numbers, versus a lot of organizations are essentially just struggling with that. All right, next slide, please.
Well, thank you very much. Is it?
You haven't heard my prediction, Steve.
I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Keep it going, Steve.
I'm trying to build the suspense.
Okay. So my predictions, my prescriptions for 2016 would be the B2C space, as Steve mentioned, will continue to mature. So we'll start to see kind of moving away from these single use cases of tracking sleep, tracking calories, to more richer and complex use cases, to where if I'm driving and I'm stuck in traffic, then my car knows to send a message because it identified a meeting on my calendar and things like that. So the use cases start to get a little more complex. Also, from an overall IoT space perspective, we'll start to see an explosion in the number of hardware and software providers, which essentially makes it hard for the organization, because there are a lot more choices now, and it isn't clear which choice is better than the other. So we have several vendors currently in the space right now. We have Oracle, we have Cisco, SAP, Microsoft's in there, Intel, IBM, and I could go on and on. I think just last week, HP announced something that they're going to offer as an IoT platform, as well as Amazon Web Services is kind of throwing their hat into the ring. So I'm expecting that things are going to get a lot more worse in terms of kind of the solutions and the providers before they get any better. And we're also going to see other sectors start to dip their toes into the IoT space. So there are lots of there are lots of companies, as I mentioned earlier, that are just kind of waiting and seeing how this pans out. So we'll start to see, as companies start to take this first step, they're going to have to overcome several different challenges. Some of them which we've already discussed, and some organizations may even have to rethink their business models just so that they can reap benefits from the IoT initiatives. And lastly, I think we'll start to see some organization, some structure around the IoT standards. So right now everything is in flux. Samsung's got their own protocols. ThingsWorks has their own protocols. So all these kind of inhibit the overall adoption of IoT, and I think these groups understand that. So what we're going to see is we're going to start to see a formation and strengthening of consortiums. And we're going to see a lot more standardization around protocols, communication technology, and how we should be addressing security. So just in closing, and I know I might be a little bit over, but if your organization is thinking on how the Internet of Things can help, I would definitely start with the use cases. As I said earlier, I think it's very easy to get caught up in the hype and say Internet of the Things is like the next wave of mobile and things like that, and just not be able to reap any benefits from it. So start with small use cases, tie those back to the business drivers, as Glenn and Deep have alluded to, and from there, I would recommend that we continue to iterate and prove business value. The space is still extremely fragmented and will continue to grow, but I think we have a long way to go before the Internet of Things becomes mainstream with the enterprise.
Hey, Nitin, Arun asked in channel, how exactly is IoT related to mobile?
So again, I think someone made the comment about when thinking about mobile, we shouldn't be just thinking about devices. We shouldn't just be thinking about what is tangible in our hands. I think IoT I think mobile as a definition is the ability to be able to do things remotely, the ability to be able to still continue working even though we're not interacting with certain things or making kind of decisions on certain things. So that includes artificial intelligence, that includes augmented, AR, VR, virtual reality, and things like that. So a lot of this, what we know as mobile today is just because of what we have in front of us. But I think that will change as IoT and artificial intelligence kind of grasp, a larger market.
Guys, any other comments before we?
Great. Are there any questions? Nope. Okay. Well, next up, strategist James Hosher and I are going to discuss some of the prescriptions around UI UX in 2016.
Great, thanks, Steve. We'll go ahead and advance to the first slide here. The big things that we want to talk about here and really stress is UI is definitely not UX, and I think this is, one of those common challenges that we have as strategists when we educate our clients, because everybody thinks by going out and delivering a great UI experience on a mobile device or your website and such, just because I have a great looking graphic or great looking front page and stuff that, check the box, I'm done. I'm there with delivering a great user experience, and that's certainly not the case. And you can see by the graphic here, the UI component is really just one small, aspect of the overall user experience. And we've seen that in our experiences as we go out and work with a lot of companies, that this is probably one of the biggest challenges, as I mentioned, in that companies are overlooking the fact that, and I think Nitin had touched on it in his prescriptions there, is that companies are not really taking the time to go in and truly understand the use cases and designing their mobile user experiences or their digital experience for that matter, to really provide seamless experiences across the different platforms in which they're engaging with their consumers or employees, and they're also struggling to really create that simple but intuitive workflow that will enable those users on their mobile devices or web platforms and such to really perform their task quickly, but also getting those desired results when they want them and when they need them in that moment of time. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So the first thing I want to talk about here is designing across platforms. So this is certainly something that's getting better that we've seen in 2015. Companies are recognizing that when they're going to design their websites or their mobile apps or social network and so forth, that they are taking the time for most part to provide some type of cohesive user experience from a UI perspective, from a design perspective across platforms. But we're still seeing this falling short in a lot of areas, and I think that the biggest thing is that we rush out to make sure that our website's mobile enabled, or relying so heavily on responsive design, thinking responsive design is the end-all solution for everything, that if I make my website responsive, that it's just going to render perfectly no matter what engagement method that my target audience is engaging with me on, whether it's a tablet, a smartphone, a wearable device, or my PC. And this is certainly not the case. What we're seeing out there is users are being more and more selective in who they engage with going forward as a partner to that business, whether it's a retail store or whether it's an insurance company and so forth, based on that experience they're getting when how they engage with you. So the biggest points here to make really are around making sure that the UI appearance, the visual aspect, is similar across the different digital channels, but also is providing the right context to that channel. So if I'm engaging as a customer and I'm an insurance customer and I need to file a claim, I want to be able to easily pull up my mobile app and be able to use that mobile app very intuitively, simply, but I also want that to have that same experience that if I was pulling up to file a claim on my PC. So I have similarity. I have that comfort that here's the key fields I need to fill out and submit. So you really have to make sure that when you're designing for your mobile experiences or your digital experiences, that you have all the platforms in mind and provide that same cohesive experience across all. Next slide. The next thing I want to talk about is really around workflow continuity across the platforms. This is something we're definitely seeing as a key differentiator, especially in the enterprise space. Probably the biggest challenge we're seeing with enterprises is the mindset that if they go out and deploy 1,000 iPad or tablet devices to their employees and think that by doing so that's mobilizing their existing client server or desktop applications, that's the answer. Those are the ones that are now resulting in unhappy employees and user experience and frankly frustration, because just giving them a mobile device doesn't mean that accessing legacy or client server based applications is going to automatically just render properly or function properly. So the biggest thing here is companies need to really understand that if they're going to embrace mobility across their enterprise, whether it's with customers or your employees or your partners and such, there needs to be that seamless user experience in the actual workflow that you're deploying in the engagement applications with them. And so one of the things we wanted to talk about here is really taking the time to understand those engagement moments, whether it's employee, customer, or partner and such. Really take a look at the workflow, for example, of an employee, and identify within that employee's day in the life of what they do every day, where are those mobile moments that can be captured in implementing mobile devices or technologies in there can drive value to that employee in their daily task, whether it's helping them be more productive in completing sales reports, or being more efficient in how they're responding back to a customer response and so forth. So it's really important that when you're looking at designing the user experience, that you keep the workflow in mind and that you design the workflow that has continuity no matter what platform or device that your target user is engaging with you on. So we'll turn it over to Steve now. I think Steve wants to share his thoughts on the gaps we're seeing in UI out there.
Yeah, so just a quick tangent. I was thinking about Apple's latest generation of products, and something interesting kind of hit me. First of all, the fact that we're seeing more devices, obviously more device types, but now suddenly we're seeing that there are more interaction modalities that Apple's been introducing. It's kind of exclusive to Apple, and I'll get into more detail in a second. But what's going to lead to is that developers and UX designers are going to be further taxed to accommodate each use case when it comes to all these different devices. And companies that are able to afford the latest devices, say like an iPad Pro, can reap the additional usability benefits of like a two-handed interface versus a one-handed interface. But I think it's going to lead to sort of a widening of what I call the UI gap, where some organizations are able to take advantage of the latest and greatest, and others sort of will wind up lagging behind. Next slide, please. So for instance, with the iPad Pro, Apple, some of Apple's words here, that it is a refined multi-touch technology, that it's a multi-touch subsystem that's been re-engineered, expanding the ways you can interact with iPad. And it's kind of interesting that Apple's taking this approach, because the iPad, none of the iPads actually offer 3D touch, which is now exclusively available on the iPhone 6 and sort of in a different form on the Apple Watch. Even though Apple's, also claiming that iOS 9 and iPad Pro were designed for each other. Well, they were when it comes to things like slide over and split view, which benefit from the larger screen. But at the same time, there are features that it doesn't have, interactive features, specifically the 3D touch. So this is kind of a new sort of phenomenon at Apple that I don't recall ever seeing before, where the devices are actually using different interaction methods. I think this is a new direction for Apple. So another example is the Apple Pencil that only works with the iPad Pro. So next slide, please. And then, as I said, on the iPhone 6s and Apple Watch, you've got 3D touch or Force Touch on the Apple Watch. And that's a pretty significant UI improvement or UX improvement, because it allows you to get to things that you need to very quickly. And I could see that being just as useful on the iPad Pro as it is on the iPhone, offering shortcuts right from your home screen icon and things like that. And Apple's calling this, quote, an entirely new way to interact with your phone. Next slide, please. So to sum up some of our UX prescriptions, first of all, you need to consider your use cases, your app features, and your interactions very carefully, probably more carefully than last year, based upon all these new ways of interacting with these devices. When you're selecting your target devices and designing your user interface. And we recommend always building for the latest operating systems and devices. And this way you get the best app out of it, and you also give your products the longest possible lifespan. We recommend customizing the interface for each device. I know we talked about maintaining consistency across devices, but you can do that and still take advantage of some of the latest native enhancements. Like I said, two-handedness for iPad Pro and 3D touch for iPhone 6s. So as a result, you're probably going to need to consider providing extra cost and time for your designers and developers to accommodate this increased variety of UX features that are out there, at least from Apple. And that's everything from me, so I'm going to pass it over to strategist Erik Engberson.
Yeah.
Hey, Steve.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Steve, I just wanted to throw in one quick thing on some of the comments that you made about the different modalities for the products. And some of this is, I was just recently at the Glance conference, which was the Apple Watch one. So there are a couple of things when you talk about these different modalities. I think some of it is because Apple is starting to look at the length of the average interaction time, and they also don't necessarily look at these as the same kind of device. They think that you're using it a little bit differently. So I think that not agreeing with the 2-in-1 thing is why you're seeing different things on the iPad Pro that are not necessarily propagated across others. But also, there was a comment at that Glance conference that the average session length for an iPhone is about 32 seconds. The average session length for a watch is 7 seconds. So I think, since those are relatively short compared to maybe what you would do on a tablet, things like the peek and pop and the 3D touch are better for those quicker interactions, and things like the pen and split view are better for where you're doing more things over a longer period of time. So I think session has something to do with it. And just the way that they're thinking about the place that these different devices play in your day.
Yeah, so really just seeing more granular sort of thought being given to these interactions with these devices, right?
Yeah, I think this is going to. We struggle with this now with even just iPad and in iOS. Now you start bringing in our Windows 10 conversation. You start looking at Android use on the smartphone growing in the enterprise. And obviously wearables, it will continue to grow from an enterprise perspective in terms of, kind of our old mantra of using corporate devices for key employees and trying to identify where that line is to allow BYOD and that whole strategy. I think that strategy now changes a bit when you start looking at this, knowing that maybe the number of devices that might be a part of a solution will change, and being able to support that. And I think it's even a bigger challenge for, if you look at MEDPs like Xamarin or Accelerator and things like this, each one of these items that we're talking about is a separate API. It's a separate managed API. Somebody's got to build it and maintain it. And then as an MEDP developer, it'd probably be too easy to just default to the basics. And so you would see that, I would think that as these interactions grow, the more organizations ignore them, right? Just due to some of these challenges, which is not a good trend, actually.
Right, exactly.
One quick comment before we move to this. So the other thing that we have been able to do in the past, which, typically we'd like to think that we're doing everything by the book, but a lot of times companies don't typically create a style guide or don't create a patterns library. I think now as we introduce more and more gestures and more ways to interact with different devices and different form factors, that just calls for the importance of a pattern library so that the experience across your device is consistent and it is delivered to be able to how the user interacts with those apps across multiple devices.
Right. And just for an announcement, I know it's at 2 o'clock right now. We're going to probably be done in the next 5 or 7 minutes. So if you guys can stick around, that would be great. We'll obviously post the recording of this and the slides on the website. So Erik, do you want to finish this up here?
I will. Hey everybody, Erik Ingberson here. So next slide there, let's go and jump right into it. So my 2016 predictions really come out of the reality of my 2015, which are we have a lot of clients who, at this level of the enterprise, with the enterprise clients that we have in the Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, there's 15 years of software delivery sort of excellence that's expected in the enterprise, whether it comes to SOX compliance, governance, the way you're going to deliver, expectations for users, etc. And a couple of years ago, mobile was getting a pass. Well, it's new, and let's just see what happens. But at this point, with mobile starting to take over some very key business processes and being integrated all the way through the tech stack, the expectations at the kind of vice president and up layer when it comes to IT management haven't changed. They still expect clean deliveries. They expect an understanding of the entire stack, and that the rest of their infrastructure and environment doesn't get impacted by mobile. The problem with that we're seeing is that specifically Apple and Google to some degree, and I only talk about Apple a little bit more just from an adoption and an uptake perspective, is that BYOD and the lack of 15 years of tooling in the enterprise is really, really driving a whole lot of sort of upheaval. So a few examples of that. Just over the summer, any enterprise client that had an MAM or MDM provider, right? We thought that was going to give us some control. All of a sudden, Apple releases a change that forces a user, instead of a single tap, to accept that MDM cert, to tap, go home, go to settings, dig into general, go from general to profiles, go find the profile, open the profile, accept the profile, trust the profile, and then say OK, and come all the way back to the MDM map to accept it. So we are starting to see that we don't have production environments that are stable, production environments that are reliable. We continue to get changes, whether it's from Apple, from Google, from our MAM providers, or our MEDP providers. And what that's doing is that's causing some churn in mobile delivery teams in the enterprise. So I can't now just count on a consistent timeline. I know how I deliver, and I understand what happens to my end users. I may be interrupted by the example that I just gave you. We may have a software update change that happens out in one of the public stores that forces us to maybe add a whole layer of features or security changes that we weren't planning, thereby increasing our scope. So we have a whole lot of movement, whereas in the rest of the enterprise stack, you don't have that movement. It's been there for 15 years. You have tools, processes, people built all around this very stable sort of Microsoft, Oracle, SAP-centric stack. So if we can go to the next slide here. So what do we do about that? We are not going to change what Apple's doing. We're not going to change what Google's doing. We don't know, as you heard Deep say earlier, are we going device-centric? There's even some disagreement on this call. You know, is it device-centric? Is it app-centric? So we have a landscape that is moving on us, and as mobile practitioners in the enterprise, we don't have a choice except to do kind of one of two things. Either you can be viewed as the mobile cowboy, and hey, when things happen, they happen and they break, and you sort of have to sort of manage that perception of how you're running your engagements, or you're a true mobile enterprise leader. And we think that the right way to go about that is to understand that the world is changing on you. It's changing on you constantly. You're not going to be able to prevent it. You're not going to be able to drive the market one way or another. So you're going to have to, as someone said, I think last week, as we were talking about this, you're going to have to get your hands dirty a little bit and build a number of environments that mimic production all the way through the stack, right? You notice a lot of the valuable apps that we're building now are integrated all the way from authentication and authorization all the way up through source systems, business data warehouse layers, and then all the way out through web service layers. So build those environments, understand what's happening in the MDM world, the MAM world, how your app is behaving out in the public app store, how the VPNs are connecting, what's breaking, what's coming up in the market. And you kind of have to do a combination of things. Understand it first. Sometimes you'll be able to find a solution and move forward with your engagement as you planned. But most of the time you're going to end up doing one of two things, which is either push some change up through the corporate governance structure, right, and help them understand why it's different, right? But again, it's because you know, not because you read something. And then number two, sometimes you're going to have to be prepared to just explain the gap. But if you're out ahead of these items, and if you're getting your hands dirty, if you understand what the impacts are, you're not viewed as the person who's just reacting. You're slightly ahead of the curve, you're catching that ball a little bit, and you're letting folks know internally where you're at, where you're headed. Again, I don't think there's a whole lot of solutions for some of these things right now. I think we are going to continue to get hit. It's going to cause us to do some extra work. We're going to spend some more money. Scope's going to get increased, but at least you're ahead of the curve. So and you can sleep a little bit better at night. So I tried to move through that pretty quick. Any questions, comments? Eric, back to you.
Eric, you always bring the reality of the situation.
I know. They always call me like Mr. Happy, Mr. Cheery, and you know,
What
birthday parties.
What else do we have to worry about?
At kids' birthday parties, they always like me to do the closing ceremony.
Well, so I know we're over a little bit. We can wrap this up. I think this is just a few. We've been talking about a lot of these things for next year and kind of planning out our kickstarts and how we want to help some of our clients and things like that. Some final thoughts just for next year as we try to kind of elevate these a little bit. We do think that next year is going to be a pretty significant game-changing year for enterprise mobile. We clearly see the increasing in our projects and what our clients are doing. We see an increased amount of complexity of use cases, and those things moving from kind of trivial mobile type of things like quick access type of areas, which are not saying they're not beneficial, but they might not be might have the longevity that we believe, to use cases that we're seeing how we change the way we work and interact, and trying to do a significant amount of work within those use cases to not only drive those larger ROI numbers with that, but to be able to significantly change the processes that sit behind those applications. Like Glenn talked about before, a lot greater focus on ROI and some direct tie to those quantitative benefits, and real ROI, real strong calculation type of things, not just typically time saved, but trying to look at other types of things that are top line, bottom line, growth, etc. We see obviously some greater possibilities and maybe some challenges for increased device interactions both what we talked about from the number of devices as well as how we interact with those devices, both from a UX and maybe a UI advances, etc. And like Erik talked about, we see it's changing, but I think it's a positive step in terms of we've seen the increased diversity of stack and some of the challenges of building consistency within that stack and trying to be able to stay ahead of that in a way. We talked a lot about before around that there's a tremendous amount of best practices that exist, meaning as we talk about management or app dev practices, platform use, UX UI standards, policy, both from a technical and business policy perspective, network and security approaches, security on device, etc. There's a significant amount of best practice that we have over the last 5 years in terms of defining those for organizations, and the answers are out there. I think what we're seeing now is kind of as this market starts to solidify and as these use cases get more complex, I think we see kind of the diversity in some of that stack starting to change, and those challenges, more and different challenges coming up this year. So I think from what's needed from a prescription perspective, I continue to use mobile to transform and simplify business process. Simple applications that aren't directly tied to ROI and have are there as another screen type of thing or as a bolt-on type of thing. Before we would say mobility is not a bolt-on, and people would build those and they would use them. And now we're seeing those things not get approved, or we're seeing them die on the vine. Clearly, diligence in terms of an approach and from an app roadmap perspective, an approach to development, methodology, and tools, and obviously, or maybe from a more of a Propelics perspective, increased guidance from experts on best practices in all these areas. Like I said, they exist, and it's better for organizations to be able to work off the back of others in some of these types of areas than to completely re-roll a solution off the bat. So last note before we hang up, I just wanted to thank everyone on this call for an amazing 2015. This year we had thousands of webinar participants and views of recording of webinars. All those are available on our website at propelics.com. We've had many, many more readers of our blog and white papers that we've published this year. We've helped more enterprise clients build mobile strategies in 2015 than our previous years combined. And that's also what we're seeing in terms of organizations taking mobility seriously, and not just as a device, but as a methodology and as a mantra. And we've significantly grown the number of enterprise apps that we look to deliver, which is 10x ROI. So we're constantly looking for applications that might be $100,000 or $200,000 applications that deliver ROI of $1 million or $2 million, or applications that are $1 million that we're looking to deliver 10. And it's a metric for us. It's something that we try to identify as we go into some of these use cases, and it's things that we absolutely believe in mobile. And what we're talking about here is not these aren't pipe dream type of ideas. These are things that we've proven, and taking that right approach to those types of areas and finding those good valuable use cases and building methodology and tools and consistency around that will lead to great ROIs. So with that, any other final questions, guys on the phone, or anything else you guys want to be able to state?
Not for me, but that was fun.
It was fun. This is our first time we've ever done a webinar like this with this many speakers, I guess. And I think it's something that we might do again. It was nice to have different viewpoints on the call. So can't have a 2-hour webinar, but it'd be more fun to sit around and talk about some of this stuff for much longer. So thanks again for everyone on the webinar, and like I said, we'll post the slides and the recording of this online tonight, and we're going to get back to our project. So thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you in 2016.
Thanks, everyone. Hope that was helpful.